Texas Hill Country, spring of 1874. The sun beat down hard on the red earth, and the air held the scent of mesquite and coming rain. Yates Dalton reined in his chestnut gelding on the edge of a dry creek, his sharp gray eyes narrowing at something up ahead movement. He had been trailing a group of rustlers for 2 days now, but what he saw was not them. It was a woman, alone, limping. Her dress torn and streaked with dust, hair matted to her face. She looked like she had not eaten in days. He dismounted fast, boots hitting the ground with a thud. "Ma'am," he called out, voice even but cautious. The woman flinched and turned, eyes wide. Her lip was split and a dark bruise shadowed her jaw. She stared at him like she expected a bullet, not a hand. "I ain't here to hurt you," Yates said, stepping forward slowly. "You need help." She swayed and nearly fell. He caught her just before her knees buckled. She was too light. Her skin was hot, fevered. "What's your name?" he asked, easing her down onto a flat rock. She hesitated like she had forgotten how to answer. Then, barely above a whisper, "Odella." Yates nodded. "Odella, I'm Yates Dalton. I'll get you to water and shade. You got someone looking for you." Her eyes shuddered. "No one's looking. They said I was worthless." The word cut through the air like a whip. Yates looked at her, then really looked, and saw the faint outline of something burned into the skin beneath her collarbone. A brand. His jaw tightened. He did not ask who did it. He just said they were wrong. 2 hours later, she was resting beneath a cottonwood, wrapped in his spare blanket, sipping water he brought from his canteen. He had not meant to stop for long, but she was too weak to travel. He set up camp for the night. That evening, as the fire crackled low, she stared into the flames. "I was sold to a man in San Saba. He branded me himself, called it a reminder, said I wasn't good for anything but being owned." Yates felt something twist in his chest. "Where is he now?" "Dead." "I broke his whiskey bottle and used the glass." He nodded once. "Good." She looked up at him, searching his face. "You believe me?" "I do." The next morning, he helped her onto the horse, and they rode toward his small homestead near Mason. He had not planned to bring anyone back with him, but plans meant little when you found a woman like Odella half dead in the dirt. His cabin was a modest place, 1 room, a porch, and a barn out back. She stared at it like it was a palace. "You'll stay here till you're strong," he said. "No strings." "You sure?" "I value my gold, Odella, but not more than a person." Her eyes filled, but she blinked hard and nodded. "All right." Days passed. She slept hard the first few nights, sometimes waking from nightmares, breath ragged. Yates never pushed. He just sat on the porch or chopped wood nearby, letting her know she was not alone. By the end of the week, she was moving easier. She helped him with the goats, fed the chickens, even cooked once cornbread and beans. A quiet pride filled her when he said it was the best meal he had had in months. One evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sky go from blue to gold. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," she said. "You are safe here," he replied. She looked at him. "Why are you really helping me?" Yates met her gaze. "Because no one deserves to be left in the dirt. And because I see you." Odella reached over and placed her hand over his. "I see you too." That night, she slept without waking. Weeks turned into a month. Odella got stronger. Her cheeks filled out and the bruises faded. She laughed more soft, real. Yates found himself looking for excuses to be near her, and she did not seem to mind. One morning, while he was fixing the broken gate, she came out carrying a small wooden box. "I want to show you something," he set his hammer down. "All right." Inside the box were a handful of charcoal sketches. Landscapes, a few animals, and one a portrait of a young girl. "My sister," she said quietly. "She died when I was 15. These are yours," she nodded. "Before everything, I wanted to be an artist." He looked at the drawings, then back at her. "You still can." She smiled, and it was the first time it reached her eyes. That night after dinner, Yates stood beside her at the fire. "Odella," she turned to him. "I want you to know, I don't see you as a burden or something broken. You're strong, you survived hell. And this place, it feels more like home with you in it." Her breath caught. "I never thought anyone could look at me and not see the brand." "I do not see the brand, I see you." They stood like that, the fire casting slow shadows until she reached up and touched his cheek. "Can I stay?" "Not just for now, but for good." His hand closed around hers. "I was hoping you would." And when he kissed her, it was not rushed or urgent. It was careful, like a promise. Like he had been waiting his whole life for that moment. Odella leaned into him, her arms around his waist, and for the first time in years she believed she was not worthless. She was wanted, she was loved, and Yates knew he had found something more valuable than all the gold he had ever carried. Her. Yates stood at the edge of the pasture, one boot propped on the lower rail of the fence, watching the sky drift from rose to blue. The morning carried a hush, the kind that settled between two people when words weren't needed. Behind him, the soft sound of a kettle lid tapping against rising steam gave way to Odella's footsteps on the porch. "You always up before the sun?" she asked, brushing her fingers through her hair, still damp from the rain barrel. "Old habit," he said, not turning. "Cattle don't wait." She stepped beside him, arms folded against the morning chill. "I never knew quiet like this. Even when I was a girl, the house was full of noise. My father had 6 hounds and not one of them knew how to mind." He glanced at her. "You miss it, sometimes." Her eyes followed the line of the hills. "Mostly I miss the parts that never really were. I used to pretend I'd grow up and travel. Paint the Mississippi, the Rockies, Mexico City. I used to copy maps out of the back of a neighbor's Bible. You draw from memory or sight. Both. Depends on the day. Faces come easier than landscapes now. You ever think of painting again?" "I think about it too much, maybe." "Then I wonder if it's foolish dreaming at my age." "You can call it foolish if you want," he said, "but I'd call it living." Her smile was quiet, but it stayed longer than before. "I'd need paper and oils. And brushes that weren't made for whitewashing walls. I'll ride into Llano next time I go. There's a dry goods place that carries supplies," he said. "We'll see what they've got." Odella looked down, the toe of her boot tracing shapes in the dirt. "You really mean to keep me here?" "I don't keep people," Yates said, "but I want you here. That's different." They spent the day mending the chicken coop, Odella kneeling in the straw with a hammer too big for her hand. She worked steady, barely pausing. By the time the sun began to dip, her arms were dusted in sawdust and her cheeks flushed from the heat. Inside, Yates stirred stew over the fire while she laid out bread and sliced onions. The warmth between them had changed, less tentative now, easier. He watched her fingers move, quick and sure. "I was thinking," she said without looking up, "we could build a frame off the shed, make a space for painting." "What would you want it to look like?" "Windows high enough for light, a table wide enough so I don't have to stack things. Maybe a shelf for sketches." "Then that's what we'll build." She paused. "It doesn't bother you?" "Me drawing instead of sewing or cooking like other women?" "I never asked for a woman who'd fit someone else's mold." That night, she sat cross-legged near the hearth, a piece of charcoal in her fingers and a scrap of paper scavenged from the bottom of a drawer. Her brow furrowed in thought, then eased. Yates watched in silence, letting her be the way he'd learned she needed. "I want to draw you," she said after a long while. He raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because you look like someone who's carried too much but never dropped a thing." "Not sure that's true," he said. "Doesn't matter. That's how you look." He didn't move, didn't question it, just let her study him. Her eyes never wavered, and when she finally set the charcoal down, her fingers were black to the knuckle. "I'm no portrait artist," she said, "but I think I caught something of you." He took the paper gently, eyes scanning the lines. It wasn't perfect, his jaw was too strong, his eyes too soft, but it felt like him. Or maybe it felt like how she saw him. "Thank you," he said. "It means more than you think." She leaned back against the hearth, her voice low. "No one's ever asked me what I wanted to build before. Or looked at a drawing like it was worth something." "It is," he said, "and so are you." Odella didn't answer right away. Then she reached for his hand, her fingers twining through his. No fear, no hesitation. They sat like that until the fire burned low, the only sound the soft crackle of coals and the steady breath of two people who had survived more than they'd ever speak aloud. Outside, the wind shifted, and the stars came out one by one, clear and bright over the hills. The summer rain had come and gone before dawn, leaving the ground soft and the air sharp with cedar. Yates was in the barn mending a worn harness when Odella stepped in, her hair braided back, a strip of linen tied around her wrist where she'd nicked herself sharpening a knife. "There's someone coming up the ridge," she said, voice low. He didn't ask how she knew she'd grown good at spotting movement before it reached the property. He wiped his hands on a rag and stepped outside, eyes to the north slope. A lone rider approached, slow but steady, dust trailing behind. The horse was lean, the man in the saddle older, his coat patched at the shoulder. When he got close enough, Yates recognized the gray streak in his beard. "Deputy Callan," Yates said, nodding once, "didn't expect you out this far." Callan dismounted with a grunt. "Didn't come for small talk." Odella stayed close to the porch, her shoulders square, her gaze steady on the stranger. "There's been talk out of Menard," Callan said, glancing at her, then back to Yates. Name came up. A man called Leighton Hobb, found dead on his floor with his throat cut. "You heard of him?" "No," Yates said, flat. Callan's eyes lingered. "He was known for trading in women. Ugly business. Somebody did the county a favor far as I'm concerned, but folks are sniffing around, asking who might have had cause." "She's not your concern," Yates said, voice like gravel. "She ain't mine. Just letting you know the wind's shifting. If she's staying here, someone might come asking questions. I'll handle it." Callan nodded, satisfied enough. "I figured you would." They didn't speak again until the deputy was a speck down the trail. Odella came down the steps, arms folded tight across her chest. "I didn't think they'd know his name," she said. "You did what you had to," she nodded, but her jaw tightened. "I didn't expect him to be missed." Yates picked up the rag again, twisting it in his hand. "He wasn't missed. Just noticed." That night, the wind curled around the eaves and Odella didn't touch her stew. She sat with her legs drawn up under her, eyes on the floorboards. "I keep thinking someone's gonna ride up and say I owe for what I took," she said. "Even if it was my life I took back." He set his spoon down. "No one owns your peace but you." She looked up, something flickering in her eyes. "I don't know how to live without looking over my shoulder." "Then we'll learn how together," he said. "You don't have to do it alone." She rose from the table without a word, crossed the room and pressed her forehead to his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, slow and sure. The next morning, she didn't wait for his lead. She was already outside near the shed, marking the ground with a stick, measuring out the space she wanted. "I figure 6 feet wide by 10 long," she said. "Enough room to walk around without bumping into things." He crouched beside her, rubbing his jaw. "We'll saw the beams from that old oak near the creek. Roof'll need to be pitched. Hard rains come fast this side of the hills." She looked over at him. "I want to paint the ridge first, where the light hits just before dusk. Then we'll build your table to face west." By the end of the week, the frame stood upright against the shed, rafters tied with hemp cord until they could be nailed proper. Odella had taken to humming under her breath as she worked, something low and tuneless but steady. One afternoon, she paused, sweat dotting her brow. "I used to think I'd spend my whole life in someone else's hands. Now I'm here, building something with my own." Yates handed her a pail of water. "You're shaping more than wood." She drank deep, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Do you ever think about what comes after this?" "I do," he said. "More than I used to." She reached into her apron pocket and drew out a small square of canvas. On it, a rough sketch of the cabin, smoke rising from the chimney, a figure in the doorway. "This is what I want to remember, not what came before." He took the canvas, thumb brushing over the lines. "Then that's what we'll build from." As evening settled, they stood beneath the frame of her studio, the bones of it casting long shadows across the yard. Odella took his hand, fingers threading through his. "I want to marry you," she said, voice even. He didn't blink. "I was waiting for the right time to ask." She smiled, but her eyes didn't waver. "I already said it." "Then I already accept." No fanfare, no flourish. Just the promise carved into the quiet between them, as real as the boards beneath their feet. They stood in the half-light, the world around them still and the ridge behind them glowing gold. In that moment, nothing was owed, nothing was stolen. It was theirs. The wind shifted early that morning, carrying the scent of wet stone and wild sage from the west. Odella stood at the edge of the new structure, sleeves rolled to her elbows, a callus forming where the hammer had rubbed her palm. The studio was nearly finished, rafters solid, the side walls boarded, a window fitted high enough to catch the late light. Yates was up on the roof, hammering shingles into place with methodical strikes. She didn't call to him. Instead, she walked the dry path past the coop, past the goats, and through the narrow break in the trees that led to the back ridge. It wasn't far, but she hadn't gone alone before, not since she'd come to the homestead. The path twisted gently, and the sound of the wind through the post oaks grew louder the farther she climbed. At the top, she stopped. Below stretched the land in shades of rust and green, rolls of field and brush stretching toward Mason in the far distance. A hawk circled high, and a cluster of storm clouds smudged the southern horizon. She crouched and pulled a small sketchbook from her satchel, pages stitched together from old scraps Yates had found in a chest, and began to draw the slope as it curved, the way the light cut across the valley brush unevenly. Her breath evened out in the stillness, and for the first time since the frame had been raised, she let herself believe she might belong to this place. The sound of footsteps behind her didn't startle. She already knew it was him. "You find what you needed?" Yates asked, stopping beside her. She didn't look up. "I was thinking about what to paint first. I wanted to see the ridge without the cabin in view. I can fetch your paints once the roof's set." "I want to mix my own," she said. "I saw some ochre in the dry bed last week. I can grind it fine, mix it with lard. There's walnut hulls near the fence line, too. Might make a good brown," he nodded. "You'll need a stone mortar. There's a shallow bowl in the barn. I already scrubbed it clean." They stood a moment longer, wind tugging at her braid. The quiet between them changed, now not empty, but full of shared thought. "I was wondering," she said, "if you'd let me paint the inside walls of the cabin." He raised an eyebrow. "With what scenes?" "Places I remember, not to cover the wood, just enough to make it ours." He crouched beside her and picked up one of the sketches. "What's this one?" "A ferry crossing in Natchitoches. I was a girl, maybe 7. We were going to see my mother's cousin. I remember the water was brown and fast, and the man rowing had an earring." "You remembered all that." "I remember a lot, especially when I'm not trying." He handed the page back. "Then paint that ferry. And the man with the earring." They walked back slow, not talking, the kind of silence that didn't strain. When they reached the cabin, Odella turned toward the goat pen. "There's something I need to check," she said, already unlatching the gate. Yates watched her go, then returned to the roof. The sun had climbed higher by the time she returned, hands stained from walnut husks, a small bundle of plant stems tucked under her arm. "Goldenrod," she said, holding it out. "It makes a yellow-green if you boil it right." He touched the edge of the bundle. "You've got plans." "I do," she said. "And they all start here." That evening, after the shingles were set and the last nail driven, they sat on the porch as the first cicadas began to hum. Odella pulled a folded square of muslin from her apron and placed it on the table between them. He glanced at it, then up at her. "What's this?" "I stitched it for the cabin. For us, I didn't have much thread, but I made do." He unfolded it. A simple design, a horse, a ridge line, and 2 small initials in the corner, O and Y. The stitching wasn't perfect, but it was steady. "I thought we might hang it near the door," she said. He folded it carefully and stood. "We'll hang it tomorrow, first thing." She watched him a moment, then rose too. "Yates," he turned. "I want to take your last name," she said. "Not because I have to, but because it's the first one that means something to me." He stepped closer, his hand finding hers. "Odella Dalton," he said like it was already true. "Sounds right." They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. When they lay down, her head tucked against his chest, there was no weight between them. Only warmth and the faint scent of goldenrod on her skin. The storm passed south, never touching the ridge. The wedding was held under the live oak that shaded the southern edge of the pasture, where the grass grew tall and soft between the roots. Yates had cleared the ground himself, trimming back the low branches and laying a path of flat stones from the cabin to the tree. There were no guests beyond the animals and the land itself. No preacher but an old neighbor, Elias Rudd, who'd once read scripture over his own wife's grave and still kept the leather-bound Bible she'd carried west from Kentucky. Odella wore a dress she'd sewn from a bolt of faded cornflower calico they'd found in the general store's back room. She'd added a line of white trim at the hem and stitched her initials inside the collar. Her hair was gathered at the nape of her neck, and she walked barefoot over the stones, slow and steady, her hand resting lightly on her belly. "You sure you want it this way?" Elias asked, squinting down at the page. "We are," Yates said. Odella nodded once. "It's enough." The vows were plain, spoken without flourish. Yates took her hand and promised to shelter and stand beside her, nothing more, nothing less. She promised to keep to him in strength and silence, and to build what they could with what they had. When Elias told them they could kiss, they did, and it was quiet and sure, the kind of kiss that didn't need to be witnessed to be real. Afterward, they ate bread and dried peaches on the porch, the sun high and hot overhead. A breeze moved through the trees, and the goats grazed along the fence line, unbothered. Odella leaned her head against Yates's shoulder, and he laid his hand over hers, fingers curled together. "I didn't think I'd marry again," she said, not lifting her head. "You didn't mention the first one before. Because it wasn't worth remembering. I was 16, he was twice my age. I buried him after the fever took him and never looked back." He was quiet a moment, thumb brushing her knuckle. "You think of leaving this place, not anymore." "I used to dream of cities, of stone streets and galleries. Now, I dream of mornings like this." That night, as the fire burned low and the crickets swelled in the grass, Yates stood in the doorway watching the moonlight spill across the yard. Odella sat at the small table inside, mixing ochre with lard in a shallow dish. Her fingers moved with care, her brow furrowed in concentration. He turned back to her. "You'll need a kiln if you want to keep pigments for long." "I was thinking that," she said. "Could build one near the shed." "Stone and clay, you mind helping?" "Wouldn't have offered if I did." She smiled, but it was different now, eased, not guarded. "You ever think about children?" He nodded once. "I do. I never got to raise any. Thought maybe that part of me was gone for good. It's not." She set the dish aside and crossed to him, slipping her arms around his waist. "I want to build a life slow, with care. We already are." They slept with the window open, the wind carrying the scent of wild mint and warm grass. In the stillness, Odella's hand rested over her stomach, and Yates's arm stayed firm around her shoulders. By early autumn, the studio was finished. The walls had been whitewashed, and Odella had painted a small ridge seen above the west window, just the suggestion of hills and sky, a lone hawk circling. She painted most mornings, her body changing with the season, her steps slower but sure. Yates built the kiln with stone from the creek bed and split wood for firing while she mixed colors on the porch. He planted squash in the backfield and mended the barn roof before the rains came. They rode into Mason once, to register their marriage and trade for goods. Odella bought a small pair of shears and a bolt of soft muslin. Yates purchased a new bridle and a second-hand rocking chair. When they returned, they hung a tin lantern above the door and planted rosemary near the steps. The child came in late spring, under a pale sky after a night of soft thunder. A boy, strong, lunged, and dark-haired. They named him Elias, after the old man who'd married them and passed away that winter with no kin to speak his name. Yates built a cradle from mesquite and lined it with scraps of Odella's old dress. She painted a swallow on the headboard, wings stretched wide. They lived that way, quiet, steady. No one came asking questions again. The land held them, and they grew into it like roots pressing through stone. Odella's hands stayed stained with pigment, and Yates's back grew stiff with the years, but neither minded. Each evening they sat on the porch with Elias between them, watching the light fade behind the ridge she had first sketched the day she chose to stay. And in that place, with the child asleep and the scent of cedar in the air, they found the life they had once only imagined, together, whole.
At peace.